Hello world. Good Sunday evening. Actually, I just realized I did not turn off my light in the back. Let me get that real quick. Otherwise that stays too bright. Today I'm going to read to you some of the story of Joseph. And I really like this story and I really relate to this a lot. And so I just wanted to read. There's a lot to read. I'm going to skip some of it only because it will take forever to read all of it. It's really a long story in the Bible. But I'm going to read most of it. And so I'm starting in Genesis 37. It says, "So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing." Now, I thought that was kind of funny. It sounded like Joseph was a little bit of a tattletale. And he was 17. And obviously his brothers were doing things that were wrong, and he would report that to his father. So already right there, they don't like him. And it said Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them, and they couldn't say a kind word to him. Also because I think he kept telling the father what they were doing wrong. One night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. So poor Joseph, he's just 17. Everything he does, everybody hates him. "Listen to this dream," he said. "We were out in the field, tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine." His brothers responded, "So you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Now, personally, I kind of think Joseph maybe shouldn't have been telling people about the dreams. He already knew his brothers hated him. I assume he knew. Maybe he should have quit adding fuel to the fire, but they were dreams from God. Maybe he thought that they would want to hear it, but they did not. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. Poor Joseph, he didn't learn. "Listen, I have had another dream," he said. "The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me." This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers, but his father scolded him. "What kind of dream is that?" he asked. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you?" Now that's kind of interesting that he said that, because actually his mother had died at this point. But maybe he thought it was going to be an eternity. But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. So at least he did wonder what it meant, and realized that it probably was something from God and just didn't know what it meant. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, "Your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready, and I will send you to them." "I'm ready to go," Joseph replied. "Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along." Jacob said, "Then come back and bring me a report." So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. So actually, you realize Jacob knew that Joseph would tell him what the brothers were doing. So he said, "You go check on him and send me back a report." When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. But Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelites," because the Ishmaelites were coming. Now you realize Ishmaelites were actually their kinfolk. Ishmael and Isaac, their grandfather, were brothers, half-brothers. So the Ishmaelites also were sons of Abraham. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders, who were also the Ishmaelites, they arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard. When Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph. Now I like this part because here you take Joseph, he's only 17. He's been in his family's home. Well, they didn't really live in a home. They lived in tents. They lived kind of to themselves, though. But he'd been with no one with his family for his whole life. He'd been tending his father's flocks, checking up on and reporting on his brothers. having dreams that God was giving him, dreams of greatness, dreams that people were bowing to him, or at least bowing to his, sheaves of wheat, which represented him. But what happens to him? His brothers hated him so much. First, they wanted to kill him. Then one of them said, instead of killing him, why don't we sell him? Well, they made a profit that way, I guess. Let's sell him, and then we won't actually have to cover up the crime. We won't really be committing such a bad crime, and we will get rid of him still. And they went and told the father, of course, that he'd been killed by wild animals. But I like through all of this, he was sold as a slave. So he had been free, living with his family. Here he was now in Egypt, a foreign land, somewhere he'd never been, among foreign people with foreign gods, foreign beliefs, nothing he was familiar with, nothing he knew anything about. 17 years old, and he's sold as a slave to an officer in Pharaoh's court. But it says the Lord was with Joseph. I like that because no matter what he was going through, no matter what was happening to him, the Lord was with him. I sometimes wonder if Joseph ever said, God, why is this happening to me? The Bible doesn't say he said that, but it doesn't say he doesn't say that. So I often wonder if he did like we did and say, God, why is this happening to me? Why am I been ripped from my family? Why is everyone that I've known and loved is gone? My home country, I'm gone from my home country. I'm in a foreign land. I'm with foreign people who have foreign beliefs. And I'm, not only that, I'm a slave where I have to do everything these people tell me. But it says the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. I like that because it didn't say Joseph succeeded because Joseph was so good at things. It said he succeeded because the Lord was with him. And I like that because that can apply to anybody. You don't have to be super, super skilled to succeed. You just have to have the Lord with you. And it doesn't mean you can be lazy and don't do anything, but he can give you what you need to be skilled and to succeed because he's with you. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. I find this quite an amazing sentence. Potiphar noticed that the 17-year-old kid was having success in everything his master gave him to do. He realized the Lord was with Joseph. Now, Potiphar was an Egyptian in Egypt. They didn't believe in the real God. But yet, somehow, something in him recognized that God was with Joseph. He must have had beliefs in some sort of gods. Maybe he believed there were other gods he didn't know about. But he recognized even that the success that Joseph was having couldn't have come from Joseph. It was from God. So this pleased Potiphar. Isn't that great that this foreign man was happy that God was blessing Joseph and making him successful? This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. So that would have been, he kind of advanced him. He promoted him. He put him in the top of his household. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. That means when he realized how God was blessing him, he said, you're at the top. So even though he was still a slave, he was still forced to be there. He was still in not less than ideal conditions. He was put at the top and probably the most privileged place in this household. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. Now, I find this interesting that God, even though Potiphar may not have been really a believer in the one and only God, he recognized what he saw as something that must surely be from a God. And he promoted Joseph. And so God began to bless this foreign man and his household. He did it to get blessings to Joseph. He did it for Joseph's sake. He didn't say he did it for Potiphar's sake. He didn't say he did it for his own God's sake. He said he did it for Joseph's sake. I heard a friend of mine told me not long ago that she knew a man, I'm trying to remember if he was a minister. I think he was a minister, that said And I think a lot of the reason this happened is because he prayed for this and he believed that it was going to happen. And so it happened. That he would walk into stores and there would be nobody in the store. Nobody was buying anything. And he would walk into the store, and she happened to be, I guess, there with him or with his family when he was there this one time. And they walked into the store, and she made a comment that's like, well, there's nobody in this store at all. And he said, there will be now because I'm here. And she said, what are you talking about? And he said, the Bible says the blessings of the Lord follow me. And so because I've come into this store, I am believing that the blessings of the Lord are going to follow me into this store, and they're going to bless this store because I am here in this store. And she said no sooner had he said that than people just started coming in the door. She said there had been nobody in this store at all. People started flooding in this store. And she said, I could not believe that. And she said something to him about it. And he goes, this happens everywhere I go. It happens everywhere I go because I pray for this. I know this verse in the Bible, and I believe that where I am going, God is going to send blessings there, not necessarily for him himself, but he's blessing the people that he is encountering. I thought that was such a neat thing, that not only the blessings aren't always necessary for you personally. There may be somebody else that you are coming across that needs a blessing. And if you're saying, God, I'm going into this place, bring a blessing at my heels for whoever is here. I just think that's a great thing to have happen. And because this man that she knew was praying for this and looking for this and expecting this in faith, he told her this happened to him everywhere he goes. So this says, all of his household, Potiphar's, the affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility of everything he owned. That's pretty good at 17. He had the responsibility of absolutely everything. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. So Potiphar basically turned over his whole household. And he was probably a very wealthy man. He turned everything over to Joseph. I find it very interesting that he trusted him. Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. I find it interesting when the God's blessings start to come. The enemy is waiting at the door to try to steal it from you and to try to undermine what God is doing. But now look at this man standing in righteousness, 17 years old, standing in what he knew was right and refusing to give in. But Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. Now, this was probably pretty bold, even though he was in charge of the household. He was talking back to the master's wife, and I don't think she cared for that at all. So, he was just a slave. How dare this slave talk to her in this way? She kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. I think that's a very interesting point there. He not only refused to do the sin she was wanting to do, he kept out of her way as much as possible. He tried to avoid any temptation or any confrontation. He just tried to stay away from it as much as he could, but he was held captive there. One day, however, no one else was around, and when he went to do his work, she came and grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, Come on, sleep with me. Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. When she saw that she was holding his cloak and he had fled, she called out to her servants. Soon all the men came running. Look, she said, my husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to make fools of us. He came into my room to rape me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream, he ran outside and got away, but he left his cloak behind with me. So it's interesting that when Satan cannot get you to fall and to get you to sin, he might make up something. He might make up a lie. She kept the cloak with her until her husband came home. Then she told him her story. That Hebrew slave you brought into our house tried to come in and fool around with me, she said. But when I screamed, he ran outside, leaving his cloak with me. Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story of how Joseph had treated her. I do really think it's a little sad that he didn't at least want to hear Joseph's side of the story or wonder if it was not true. But here we are. This is what happened. So he took Joseph and threw him into prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. Now, here is someone who's already, their life is pretty bad. It's as good as it can be in the circumstances, but he's a slave. He's not in his home anymore. He's not with any of his family, thinks he'll probably never see them again in his life. He is in a foreign religion, foreign country, foreign people, and he's forced to remain. But this next verse is really the key. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. Now, I don't know what he did to show him his faithful love, but Joseph must have known he was there, and God somehow showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. So no matter where Joseph was, where he was put, this is, being in prison is worse than being a slave. But yet still, whoever's in charge recognizes the blessing of God. You know, how do you look at somebody in a prison and say, oh, I see the blessing of God in them? How do you look at someone who's a slave and say, I see the blessing of God on this person? Wouldn't you look at the person and say, God must be mad at them to make them a slave. God must really be trying to get them. God is making them pay for something because they're in prison. That's not what they saw. He had God with him and a part of him somehow to such an extent that what people saw was not somebody that had done wrong or not somebody that was a slave. They saw God when they saw Joseph, and they saw what God was doing. I find that so interesting, that no matter what circumstances, and they always saw that God was with him. And did they not ever say, why would your God want you to be a slave? Why would your God want you in prison? They never questioned this, it doesn't seem. It seems like he was being so blessed and touched of God wherever he was, that that's all they saw was God. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. So now he's like an assistant warden. Again, he's in charge of everything. The warden had no worries because Joseph took care of everything. So obviously he could be trusted. They knew he could be trusted. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Now, the Bible does tell you about the two people in the prison that had dreams and Joseph interpreting their dreams. And then it says 2 full years later, this is after the interpretation of the dreams, they were supposed to remind Pharaoh of, we're going to, give Pharaoh a word that I'm here in the prison. Because, obviously he must have wanted out. As much as God was blessing him and helping him, nobody wants to stay in the prison. But they forgot. One of them died, and the other one that didn't die forgot. He completely forgot. 2 full years later. So he's still in prison, hanging out in prison for 2 years. He probably had given up on anybody doing that. Pharaoh dreamed a dream that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw 7 more cows come up behind them from the Nile. These were scrawny and thin. These cows stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy, fat cows, and at this point the dream Pharaoh woke up. But he fell asleep again and had a second dream, and this time he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and beautiful, growing in a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. These thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump, well-formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams. So he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. Today I have been reminded of my failure. Yeah, that was quite a failure, wasn't it? 2-year failure. He told Pharaoh, some time ago you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. Everything happened just as he had predicted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, I think it's funny that the Bible The Bible's telling us that Joseph shaved and changed his clothes. I guess it wants us to have the full picture. He went in and stood before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means, but I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It is beyond my power to do this. Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. I like it that even when he is brought there, he doesn't say, yes, oh king, I can interpret your dream. He said, I can't interpret a dream. I can't interpret a dream, but God can, and he'll set your mind at ease. So Pharaoh told Joseph the dream. Pharaoh, okay, let me see where I'm going here. Oh, wrong page. I think I missed a page. Oh, yes. Okay, here we go. So Joseph responded, both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. Now, I think normally God would not speak to someone who was not a man that was worshiping him. Pharaoh obviously did not worship the true God. They had a lot of gods in Egypt, a lot of false gods, a lot of idols. So you don't normally see God giving a dream or something to an ungodly person. He did do it other times in the Bible, but it always seemed to be because somewhere he had a godly person that was going to come along and tell the dream or interpret something or tell the son. So God will use even an ungodly person if it's going to advance his cause. So Joseph said, the 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that came up later and the 7 thin heads of grain withered by the east wind represent 7 years of famine. This will happen just as I have described it, for God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt, but afterward there will be 7 years of famine so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God, and he will soon make them happen. I find that interesting. We don't hear a lot about that. When he had 2 similar dreams, it means the events have been decreed by God. That's an interesting statement. Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors of the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouses. Store it away and guard it so there will be food in the cities. That way, there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, this famine will destroy the land. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Well, they couldn't, because none of his magicians could even tell him what the dream meant. So obviously they weren't going to argue. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on the throne, will have a higher rank than yours. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen, that must have been nice after the prison rags, clothing, and hung a gold chain around his neck. So from the worst possible position in the entire country that there could be, first a slave, then prison, nothing worse than those 2 things. He's not only in prison, he's an imprisoned slave, to the highest position in the land other than Pharaoh in one day. That's a pretty good promotion. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command. And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but No one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. So even though Pharaoh's saying, I'm in charge, but I am going to give you dominion over everything. So then there's the part in the story about the famine. The good years come, they gather the grain and they store it in the food, and then the famine comes. And after a few years, the brothers of Joseph and his father, they're starving, and so Joseph sends them, and Jacob sends them. Joseph knows who they are right away. They don't know him because he had only been 17, and it was like 13 years later, and he was about 30 years old. So I'm sure he had on, the Egyptians, if you look at that era, they wore a lot of helmets and different headgear, and they did things with their hair, and they did things with their eyes, and so he probably did not look like them. Even if they wouldn't have recognized him in Egyptian attire and Egyptian makeup. They really, if you see that, they wore all kind of stuff that was so different. Even if he'd still been 17, they may not have recognized him, but they really didn't recognize him 13 years later. And then, as you know, he kind of plays a little trick with them and sends them back with the grain and sends them back with their money and says, I got to see your brother. Well, anyway, they finally come back. And when they finally come back the final time, it says Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, out all of you. So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? But his brothers were speechless. I'm sure because they thought he was dead. Even though they knew they didn't kill him and they'd sent him to be a slave, I think there's at one point they actually think he's probably dead. Because we've not heard from him. He didn't escape. He didn't do anything. So maybe he really is dead now. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. Please come closer, he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset. I love this part. Don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. He recognized that from the very first. I think when the very first moment that he heard Pharaoh's dream and knew and God told him what it meant, it means great famine is coming, not only to Egypt, but to the entire known world at that time. I think he knew in that moment, God sent me here to save not only Egypt, save not only the world, to save my own family. And I think he began working from that time when he realized that he was there to save everyone, that he began working for his family. This famine has ravaged the land for 2 years and will last 5 more years. And there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. I think it is interesting that he didn't view them as his enemies. He didn't say, even though he did kind of play some little dirty tricks on them, they probably deserved it. But he didn't say, you wanted to kill me and you sold me into slavery, so I'm not giving you any food. He said, God sent me here to save you, basically. And he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of this entire palace and the government of all Egypt. So he knew that none of this came about because of him. He did nothing but take care of his father's sheep. That's all he did, the cattle. He was a shepherd. There's no way he could know at 17 how to manage anything, how to be an administrator of anything. It was because God gifted him and he knew it. And so then after this, Jacob set out for Egypt with all his possessions. And when he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. So it's neat that Jacob is now going to see his son, but he stops on the way to worship. During the night, God spoke to him in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he called. Here I am, Jacob replied. I am God, the God of your father. The voice said, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make your family into a great nation. I will go with you down to Egypt. I think that's great that God is making sure he knows, I'm going to be with you. When Joseph went down to Egypt, God was always with him. And God is now telling his father, when you go down to Egypt. So he tells him, when you go down to Egypt, I am going to go with you, and I will bring you back again. You will die in Egypt, but Joseph will be there to close your eyes. So Jacob left Beersheba and his sons took him to Egypt. As they neared their destination, Jacob sent Judah ahead to meet Joseph and get directions to the region of Goshen. When they finally arrived there, Joseph prepared his chariot and traveled to Goshen to meet his father Jacob. When Jacob arrived, he embraced his father and wept, holding him for a long time. Finally, Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen your face again and know you are still alive." Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. "How old are you?" Pharaoh asked him. Jacob replied, "I have traveled this earth for 130 hard years." It's interesting he said they were hard years. Now, we had earlier in the verses, it says Joseph and Benjamin also. They were the sons of Jacob in the elderly years. That's why he made him the special coat, because he was the son of his older years. And so I was adding this up just for interest, that if Joseph got there when he was 17, and then he was in prison for a couple of years, and then the famine for 7 years, and then when his brothers came, the famine, we were into the famine for a couple of years. So you had, if he was in prison for a couple of years, he was 19. And then if there was 7 years of famine, he was 26. And then if there's a couple of more years there's 7 years of prosperity rather, and then 2 years of famine, he was 28. And then I think I added another year because he was with Potiphar for a while. So you figure he is, is he 29? I think it was 39. Anyway, I came to the conclusion that Jacob had to have been around 91 when he had Joseph. So he definitely was older. And then he says to Pharaoh, "But my life has been short compared to the lives of my ancestors." Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh again before leaving his court. So Joseph assigned the best land of Egypt. So that's something else he could do. Gave his family the best. The region of Ramses to his father and his brothers, and he settled them there just as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided food for his father and his brothers in amounts appropriate to the number of their dependents, including the smallest children. Now, I think it's interesting that in the 60s or 70s, that they came with the musical called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I had not seen that actually until I was an adult. I saw it one time. I thought it's really got some good music in it, and especially for that time. And from what I understand, they just wrote that musical for a school performance. It wasn't originally made as a big production. It was written, the play originally was written for a school, as a school play, which I thought was very interesting. And but the one song that's the main theme song of the show is called "Any Dream Will Do." And I love the first line of that. The first line of that song has always spoken to me. And I don't know, my thing keeps disconnecting. I don't know what the people who wrote that song intended it to mean, but I know what it means to me when I hear it. And the first lines of that song say, "I closed my eyes," and it's Joseph singing this song. "I closed my eyes, drew back the curtain to see for certain what I thought I knew. I closed my eyes, drew back the curtain to see for certain what I thought I knew." That line, that first line, says volumes to me. And like I said, I don't know if this is what they meant, but this is what I get out of it. He closed his eyes, and in his mind, he pulled back the curtain. What curtain was he pulling back? In my thoughts, he was pulling back the curtain of his faith. And up until that time, Joseph had just lived at home. He had learned what his parents had taught him and what his father had taught him, because his mother had died when he was fairly young, I imagine. So he had learned about God. He obviously had a relationship with God. He knew God. God was giving him dreams. I think he knew they were from God. He was a righteous young man. He would not even be forced into sin. When somebody tried to force him to sin, he wouldn't do it. He did what was right. He always chose what was right. Even though he was a kid and he might have done some things that really made his brothers hate him. But when it came to outright sin, he stood his ground and said, I cannot do that against God, and I cannot sin against my master. And he knew what he believed. I think he did. He knew what he believed. But what that line says, I saw for certain what I thought I knew. I really think he was a man up until then that believed God would always be with him, believed God would deliver him, believed God would lead his life. He believed God was going to do what God would be best for his life and best for that of his family. He believed it, but he hadn't seen it yet. He believed it in faith. And I believe it's saying that when he closed his eyes and pulled or drew back the curtain, he saw for certain what he thought he knew. I think what that's saying is when he was in the slave home and then he was in the prison, the faith that he'd had that God would be with him and that God would stand for him, that's what he thought he knew. He thought he knew that God would be there. He knew, he had faith in it. But when it actually happened, he saw it for certain. I love that part that says he saw for certain. He saw that God really, his faith God did not fail him. What he believed and what he thought he knew, he saw it for certain. God not only was with him, God not only prospered him and prospered the homes he was with, he prospered the prison he was in. He promoted him to the top of the land. He allowed him to save his entire family and the entire known world at that time. He at that point knew for certain. So when his brothers came and he said, do not be upset with yourselves, God sent me here ahead to save you. At that point, he knew it for certain. He told his brothers the dream, and at that time, he didn't really seem to make any comment about it. I'm not sure he knew what it meant at the time, or if he was certain. He thought he knew. He might have thought he knew, but now he could close his eyes, draw back the curtain, see for certain what he thought he knew. And I really think in our lives, when we go through things that end up not at all what we thought. Joseph surely never expected that his brothers hated him so much that they would want to kill him and then sell him into slavery. He never thought he was going to be ripped from his home. He never thought there was a possibility maybe he'd never see his loved ones again. He never thought he'd be taken to a foreign land. He never thought he would be enslaved. He never thought he would be somewhere that it seemed like maybe God wasn't there because they didn't really worship God. They had their own gods. But God went with him. He never thought he'd be in prison. He was doing the right thing. Here he was doing the right thing, what God would want him to do, the righteous thing. And what happened? He got thrown in prison for nothing, for doing what's right. He got thrown in prison. He never expected that. When the two men in the prison had the dream and they forgot to tell Pharaoh, he didn't expect that. He didn't expect any of this stuff. But when all of it happened and he was in adversity, he found out for certain that God was always with him, and wherever he was, God was making him a success to get him to the place he needed him to be to save his family and his world and the world at that time. And I'm going to sing this song. I really like this song, and this song about God being a protectant for us and holding us during the times of adversity. In the dark of the midnight have I oft hid my face, while the storms howl above me, and there's no hiding place. Midst the crash of the thunder, precious Lord, hear my cry. Keep me safe till the storm passes by. Many times Satan whispered, there's just no need to try, for there's no end to your sorrow, there's no hope in the by and by. me safe till the storm passes by. Many times Satan whispered, there's just no need to try, for there's no end to your sorrow, there's no hope in the by and by. But I know He is with me, and tomorrow till the storms never darken the skies, till the storm passes over, till the thunder sounds no more, till the clouds roll forever from the sky. Hold me fast, let me stand in the hollow of your hand. Keep me safe till the storm passes by. Luke 1:4 says, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed. I know we are believing and we're living our lives in faith. The Bible says without faith it is impossible to please God. And yes, we will always have faith, and there will be things we will always have to retain the faith and not know till we are in heaven. But every once in a while, you will see that what you have had faith in is a certainty, because God will He'll be there, and you will know He's there, and He will bring blessings to you. He will bring change to your life, even though you may be in prison, even though you may feel like you're enslaved, even though your conditions aren't what you want and they aren't ideal. I have been living that way for years now, where I look at my life and say, there isn't a thing in my life that I would have picked and still wouldn't pick. There is really nothing in my life that I really want there. Everything that's there is nothing that I want at all. And it is not turned out that I would say, oh, well, God knew better and it's so great. No. I still don't want it there. It is not great. But He is with me, and I am waiting for the day, the tomorrow, when I will rise. I do believe I've started, and I've begun to rise, and I have begun to come out really of the real prison that I've been in. And I'm coming out. I'm still not all the way out of everything, but God is with me, and He is faithful, and He will be there for you. Have a good evening.